I'm chatting to Central Hawke's Bay Mayor Alex Walker. Kia ora, Alex, and thank you for joining me.
Kia ora, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Alex, it's been a while since we spoke. I think it was just after the cyclone. Just want to get an update on where things are at relating to the recovery.
Sure. Well, to be honest, it feels a bit fraudulent to call it recovery at the moment because everything here is just so sodden, wet. The last 10 days have not been kind to us here in Central Hawke's Bay, and when I think about recovery, I think it's probably slow at the moment, and a lot of people feeling pretty dispirited by the weather and just the water that just keeps making things quite difficult, particularly in the rural areas where it comes to the slips and the roading and the damage on farms and on properties. But also the nerves that it causes around some of our towns as well. So it's a kind of a strange place, Andrew, to be honest.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So a relatively minor weather event of this weekend still caused you problems.
It caused problems across our infrastructure. We had issues with our drinking water treatment in Waipukaro. So the town of Waipukaro, 5,000 people were on a boil water notice for a number of days. We lost more infrastructure. We lost a bridge on Highway 50 between Takakino and Onga, which is causing all sorts of grief. We had some bridges connecting parts of our isolated Wakarara communities that also were re-damaged, but also just the nerves and the tensions around people living in places like Waipawa in particular, as the rain came down and people just start to think about what they've been through previously and are they going to have to go through it again, a time that community really needs a lot of reassurance.
Well, we were on the banks of the river there in Waipawa a while back, and you showed us where the water had come, and that, so I can imagine that people were quite worried. So you were on alert, and your team was on alert there?
Yeah, they certainly were. So there was preparation work done by our team, but also by the regional council. So we take these things seriously. There was interim plans in place, for instance, if people needed reassurance to not be in their homes and needed to evacuate, or if it had got to that point, we didn't really know. We've got stop banks that are rebuilt along the Waipawa River, which is an absolute godsend, but they are new and they haven't had their quality assurance sign off yet. So people were wondering. The regional council were there preparing, they were covering the stop banks, they were putting some sandbagging around the pieces that had also been prepared, just in case there was sort of preparatory things underway. And what we saw was the rivers rise to what is probably quite a normal winter rain sort of level around their channels and up to, in places, to the bottom edge of the stop banks. But actually we ended up, it was nothing too much to worry about, but the preparations had been put in place.
So tell me more about this bridge and that was knocked out, and what problems is that causing? And obviously that's another cost for you.
Yeah, so State Highway 50 runs almost in parallel to State Highway 2 through Central Hawke's Bay, and it connects through the really productive plains area of the Ruataniwha Plain. So it's a really important part of our farming area, but it's different to the rest of the hill country. So State Highway 50 runs basically from Takapau in the south through, connecting directly into the back of Hastings and through to Napier at the north. It goes past the villages of Onga and Takakino. And so a bridge right in the middle of there, which has had a major washout of the abutment where the Waipawa River goes under that bridge. And so what that means is a really important freight route, which is disrupted. So now all of the trucks, all of the freight, and all of the transport are coming along State Highway 2. So what that means is everything is coming through the town centres of Waipukaro and Waipawa, large numbers of trucks, congestion there, but it's also disrupting how farmers are operating and even just even our kids trying to get to school. So those that are on the northern side of the river trying to get to the southern side where they normally would go to Onga Onga School 5 minutes away, but have now got a 30 to 40 minutes detour around to get to school.
Sounds like you need one of those Bailey bridges.
This is quite a big expanse of this river, and it looks like the abutment is still moving, but Waka Kotahi and Hawke's Bay Regional Council are actively watching that and looking for what the next engineering steps are to get that back up and running, but we're still not sure how long that will take.
Now, I think you, along with other councils, Hawke's Bay councils, have been involved in these negotiations. I know with government, I know you don't have level 3 properties, but I think it's become almost a wider conversation about funding, and I see they've just extended the negotiations. How, as far as you know, are things going?
Look, we're collectively ready to have a principle-based conversation with government about what is needed. Obviously, the opening conversation is about what commitments have been made around Category 3 properties. But very clearly, where we are as a collective in Hawke's Bay is that we can't talk just specifically about that when we actually have other properties who need flood protection works and other measures in place that are in Category 2 to be able to move as well. So it's difficult for us to talk about that in just a singular Category 3 conversation, but we've been ready to have a principled conversation and negotiation for a few weeks now, and looking forward to that, taking some steps forward.
And now, how much money do you have in the kitty to bring to the table? Or I spoke to your counterpart in Wairoa, Craig Little, and he says the best figure for councils to contribute is naught. Would you agree with that?
Look, we're a small council with a very small rating base. We're severely challenged by this recovery conversation on top of the infrastructure demands that we have got on us at the moment with a small ratepayer base. And zero has to be the start of the conversation from a Central Hawke's Bay perspective. We've just struck a 11% rates increase for our annual plan for this year. We're having to push pretty hard, and it's a pretty tough place to be in.
We'll get back to the rates increase, but Martin Williams, regional councillor, said that this could bankrupt councils. Is that sort of being overly dramatic, or do you think he's got a point there?
I think that we have to look at the overall system that supports our communities, and I think that we need to look at actually the recommendations that have come out of an independent review of local government. Even at the highest level, there is very clear insights into the fact that the funding and operations in New Zealand are over-centralised, and that we have to do something to break what is a broken system for how local government is funded, empowered and trusted to be part of what local solutions look like, and that there are big system changes that are required. Look, I don't think we can think about it just in a recovery sense. There's actually a wider system issue.
Yeah. And now, how much have you as a council spent so far on the recovery, if you like?
Well, it would actually be really difficult for me to give you a number right now off the top of my head, but the amount that has been spent directly on roading through our normal channels is well over 10 to 15 million. We've also had emergency funding, which has been used for some other emergency roading works, which take that up to about 35 that are either completed or in progress. And to give you some comparison, we would normally spend about 14 to 15 million just on roading alone in the district in a whole year. And so that's now approaching 35 million, of which a fair proportion of that has been funded via Waka Kotahi, but our own local funds have been used. Several million in emergency works through the emergency operations, about 1.5 to 2 million. We're sitting at about 80% recovery of those costs through NEMA, but then we've also got some replacement and repair of drinking water plants, wastewater plants and stormwater networks, some of which were insured, but there is a balance there that is still not covered. And in fact, our drinking water treatments in particular in Waipawa that continue to be particularly vulnerable until we can find funding mechanisms to build back into a stronger, more resilient way.
Now, those rate rises you're talking about, 11% you say, was it much higher, and have you been able to pare it back?
Yeah, well, interestingly, before the cyclone was looking to be in the 14 to 15% when we looked at where inflation was going and where our financing costs were sitting in particular. We've got huge capital programs underway here, and particularly around upgrades to our wastewater treatment. So before the cyclone, we had done quite a large rationalising piece of work that had brought that down to about 9%. And what we have done is, in the intervening time since February the 14th, we've gone back through everything again. And what we have done is contributed a large amount of reserve funding. So pretty much all of our emergency reserve funding we had put aside for roading issues in particular. We're using that. We're using reserve funds we had put aside to assist with bridges. All of those just in an attempt to have our contribution towards how do we repair our roading. And that, on top of increased stormwater requirements in particular, and recovery coordination, is what then took that number back from the 8.5%, 9% back up to 11%. And we're still, to be honest, we're pushing things around to get to some kind of number which is achievable, but 11% in our community on top of what we've already had to do in the last few years is confronting.
Yeah. How much are those reserves that you spend in?
There's about 1.5 million worth of those additional reserves, and it means that we now move into a position where, with future events of any scale over the coming few years, that we would be looking to have to use more debt. And our Three Waters capital program, particularly around wastewater that I've just mentioned, is already putting huge pressure on our balance sheet when it comes to debt. So we're really getting down to some pretty hard calls financially.
Yeah. Now I see the regional council has gone for a model where they've kept the rates increase low, but they've added an additional sort of cyclone tax, if you like, on that. Was that something you considered, or you prefer just to keep it all in the rates increase?
Yeah, well, we have every council has a slightly different rating mechanism for how they collect rates. And the interesting thing for us is that when we take the roading impacts and then the Three Waters impacts, which are the two big infrastructure pieces, mostly the roading impacts affect the rural community and the water impacts affect the urban community. And actually, when we looked at how that all played out, it was a pretty even contribution across the district, and we didn't need to go to an additional new type of rating mechanism. It was covered by what we already had.